Hi, I'm Jason Levine. Today we're talking to Oscar-nominated documentary filmmaker Amanda Micheli, who's here to explain how Harvard, rugby, and rodeos helped shape her career. And she'll share the backstory to her newest documentary, Vegas Baby, which comes with a story of personal struggle and perseverance. This week on Make It. Amanda, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you on the show. Great to finally get to meet you in person.
Thanks for having me.
And, I was trying to think how to really begin because your story is truly an amazing one, very interesting. And I was trying to think of some terms to kick it off. And I was thinking, well, things that apply to you. So Vegas, Wonder Woman, rugby, Harvard documentary film program. Maybe kind of tell our viewers a little bit about sort of your origins and how you got into documentary filmmaking, kind of the path that you've taken, because it's a really interesting story and one that was inspiring for me to hear just from the start.
I loved movies. I always loved movies. So I had an idea that maybe film was where I wanted to go, but because I hadn't really seen documentaries as a young person, I just always imagined that would be fiction.
Right.
But then when I was applying to colleges, I was looking at a couple schools. And I think actually I did that thing where I applied and didn't really look till after I got in.
Right.
And I applied to Harvard, and I had heard that they had a good film program, and I got in. That's one of those things, you gotta look at Harvard if you get into Harvard, right?
Sure.
So I went,
yes,
and I was really surprised because everybody in the film program there loved it.
Right.
And it was, there were some really great teachers there, and certainly there have been some really prolific people to come out of that program who have made successful fiction films, but the program itself is primarily documentary.
Documentary, right.
So that's where I cut my teeth, and my thesis film as an undergraduate was called Just for the Ride.
Right.
And it was a film about women's rodeo. So as an undergraduate, I made an hour-long film
Right.
that ended up going to television. So I really kind of started young in that sense.
So following Just for the Ride then, okay, so that was PBS aired, so your first kind of exposure on television. What was that experience like? And of course, among your classmates, you were 20-something making this thesis film. That must have been huge just to have that kind of exposure.
It was a pretty big deal. I'm not sure I realized that at the time. Looking back, I realized what a big deal it was because I know how hard it is now to get films on television. Right. And the film got a student Oscar and did film festivals, and I just thought that was normal, because
right.
I didn't because when you don't know what to compare it to, that's your experience. So when I went to the student Oscars, all the other students were from grad schools, from AFI and NYU, and they all had scripts in their back pocket.
Right.
And I showed up and I was like, free champagne, party. I brought my sister as my date, and we were just hitting the hors d'oeuvres.
Right.
And there was something really, I look back on that and I really cherish that part of my life where I was so naive.
Right?
Yeah, I was innocent and I was just enjoying myself. And now it's I go to those things and I make sure I have my business cards. I maybe don't have a script in my back pocket, but I know how to network.
You had no agenda going in other than, hey, I'm here for the good time.
Yeah, and I wanted to make another film, but I didn't realize what a precious moment that was to kind of market and brand myself. And now that has become such a thing in the film world. But I really came into it in this sort of other rough and tumble way.
Right. Now, speaking of rough and tumble, I mentioned rugby before.
Yes.
So how did this begin, and how did this kind of influence? Because I know you said this in how rugby and just sort of athletics kind of influences how you make film and tell stories.
Rugby was the first time that I could perform at an athletic pursuit with a team and really enjoy that community and that family. And it's tough, and I really kind of enjoyed that challenge. And to me, there's a lot of parallels between contact sports and filmmaking. If you can pick yourself up off the ground after getting your ass kicked and keep going.
Which is going to happen.
Yes.
It's going to happen.
It is inevitable.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable in rugby, it's inevitable in film. And it's very physical filmmaking, especially documentary.
What was the next project that you started working on?
The next project was called Double Dare. And I met this woman named Xena Epper, who at the time was the president of the Stunt Women's Association, and she was the double for Wonder Woman.
Right.
And I thought, well, this is an interesting character.
Yes.
And so I really loved Xena, and we were filming with her and then filming with some other people, but I hadn't quite figured out what the film was yet. And then finally, I met this young woman who was the stunt double for Xena, Warrior Princess.
Right.
And so she was in her early 20s. She lived in New Zealand. And Jeannie was, at that time, probably in her 60s.
Okay.
And she was in LA. So I thought, well, this is a really interesting comparison.
Right.
You know, one woman at the end of her career struggling with how does a woman in her shoes transition,
Right.
facing retirement, and a lot of male stuntmen can go to second unit directing and make a very good career even when their bodies are falling apart.
Right.
Not so much for the ladies.
Not as common,
And this
right.
young woman at 20 trying to break into the business.
Right. And Xena was still it was still a show at that time.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
so I got to film on set of Xena, and I got to film on their last day.
Oh, right.
when Zoe had her last day.
Right,
So
yeah.
so Zoe Bell, who was the double for Xena, ended up going on to other exciting things, and that's what Double Dare follows. But we filmed that film for over 7 years. It was a project that went on, and at the same time, I was working for hire as a cinematographer for others.
Right.
So that was kind of how I cut my teeth, was doing these independent projects of my own that were passion projects, and then hiring myself out as a DP
Right.
on other productions.
So that kind of brings up an interesting point, because I imagine as a documentary director, I mean, and I say this, I mean, you're not doing it for the money, really, right?
Well, if you are, you aren't that smart.
Right. Right. So how do you sort of maintain sustainability, just, living your life? Part of that is doing other things, being a cinematographer, being a DP, but how do you, it's got to be more than that, because I imagine there's a constant commitment and investment in your own time to a 7-year ongoing project, and there's a schedule there, right?
It's a constant struggle. Right. It's a constant question, and I think it changes. It doesn't change every day, although it's a question that I face every day. But I think there's sort of different chapters in my life,
right.
And I still love shooting, and I shoot a lot of my own stuff. I shoot less for hire these days, for a lot of different reasons. But one is that I ended up herniating a disc in my neck. And that, that's part of all the work that I've been doing, but especially the shooting. I shoot handheld a lot on one side. And when I went to the doctor, he said, I can see this a lot from firefighters, because they'll carry the hose on one side. Right. He said, can you put the camera on the other side? And I was like, doctor, that's challenging. I'm not sure I can retrain my eye and my shoulder and all that and get a special camera. So as I've gotten older, I've transitioned more to directing commercial work, corporate work. And that's really challenging and really competitive too, because there's a lot of really talented directors who dedicate their time to that craft and that art, and have reps and producers that are helping them, and that's their gig. Whereas for me, I'm kind of going back and forth between the two worlds. So it's a challenge, but I've mostly been able to make a living doing what I do as a director, for the last this past 25 years. I started out making money as a DP, and now more I've been able to make it as a director. But I think the hardest part is to actually make a living from your passion projects.
Right.
So I think sometimes it's best to not put that pressure on them.
Right.
But it is a challenge.
Well, and that kind of segues into La Corona, which I think is another kind of very inspirational story, because this was something where you've been nominated for an Oscar, and the experience of kind of going through that Oscar experience, which I think most people, whether you're in documentary filmmaking or any kind of film, like, you sort of aspire to that. But the experience, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's great.
It's great.
Yeah,
but maybe the experience isn't what you expected or what you ultimately thought it would be.
First of all, it's a huge deal. I mean, you certainly don't want to belittle that experience. That was a big deal.
Huge deal, right.
But when I look back on my career, it's not my favorite moment. I think that the things that end up staying with you are kind of the smaller, more intimate moments. The Oscars were hugely stressful. And the funny thing is, it is a really gendered experience, because as a woman, the very first thing anybody says to you is, what are you going to wear? What are you going to wear? I'm like, I'm a documentary person. What do I care? But on the other hand, it's like, you do care, because you can't just show up in a tux. I mean, you can, but I don't know. That's not really my vibe. Like, I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to wear a dress. But no, it was an amazing experience. But thank God we really felt like being nominated was what mattered, because I was so nervous about, they drill it into you, do not, your speech has to be this long, and you can't go, they even have little DVD they send to your house with Tom Hanks telling you how not to go over time. And so it's all about that. And everyone's taking Xanax and completely freaked out. So in a way, when you don't win, you're like, all right, we get to go drink, because it's so stressful.
So much stress.
No, it was a unique experience, to say the least.
So let's talk about your current film, Vegas Baby, which is coming to Netflix any day now. May already be there by the time we air this. And you brought us a 1-minute trailer, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, let's take a quick
little
look
segment we can watch
at Vegas Baby.
Those who don't win, they get loans, they max credit cards, they borrow money from family.
We're already in debt. Do we bankrupt this family to try to fulfill this dream?
I just hope everything works out. But whatever happens, we're in this together.
Me being able to be public about this gives meaning and purpose to the pain that I've gone through.
I've heard her say, what's the point in being married if you can't have kids? Boy, that's sure stuck here.
We can't guarantee a baby, nobody can. But one chance is certainly better than no chance.
You're my man.
I'm your man.
Yeah, with God and you.
Not having control over your reproduction is raw pain, emotional pain.
Oh, we waited so long for you.
Maybe we're supposed to have it because we're supposed to have that drive to procreate.
So now, currently available on iTunes and Netflix, as we mentioned. Now, how this project, and again, the look of it, the story behind this, how did you find out about this IVF competition?
I guess, unfortunately, when I was a young woman, I had films that had personal connection to me, so I was looking at women's sports. So, talk about innocent, naive, right? But as I got older, my priorities have shifted, and I've been very focused on my career. I got married later in life, found a good guy, and it kind of took us a while to figure out how to have a relationship, period, while making films and him doing his work. And then it was like, oh shit, I forgot to have a family. I just had one of those like senior moments. I was 39, and I was like, I think I want to have a kid. There just hadn't been a lot of conversation around that in my life and my family, and so I came to that realization late in life, and I was ill-informed about what our chances would be for me at 39. So long story short, we ended up having this pretty intense infertility experience and ended up finding out that the only way that we could have a child was through IVF. And it was partly my age, but partly his sperm count. And we had no idea why he had such a low sperm count. So we thought, okay, well now, this is something we never thought we would do. We never thought we were those people. And I think we had a lot of judgments around it.
Okay, yeah.
But we didn't really tell a lot of people, and we took our savings and put it towards this gamble, and it didn't work. And I was really shocked because I thought, well, obviously, if we're going to go through all this and we're going to spend the money, like this will happen.
Right.
So when it didn't work, and I realized what we had gone through and just like how ignorant I was about the whole world of reproductive medicine, I thought, gosh, I should figure out how to make a film about this. Simultaneously, I was facing this decision of, do we try again?
Right.
Either way, it sounded horrible. I couldn't imagine trying again. I couldn't imagine not trying again and accepting that we couldn't have a child. So I was reading on the internet, like Googling financial support for IVF, like looking for loans basically to do a second round of IVF, because insurance doesn't cover this typically. And I saw this article on contests and raffles that clinics were doing for people who were desperate for these services who couldn't afford them. And my first thought was like, this is effing crazy. Am I allowed to swear on this? I don't know.
A little bit, yeah.
It's freaking crazy. But my second thought was, I kind of get it. I get that desperation. I get the desire.
Right.
Those people that I was watching perhaps were more extreme in their desire than I was. And I still maybe thought, oh, well, if it happens, it happens. But once you get down that path, there is this sense of desire and then this really palpable sense of loss that I think a lot of people who haven't been through it don't get.
Right.
So I knew once I saw this concept of the contest that this would be a unique and provocative way to bring the infertility story to light.
The fact that now this is with Netflix, and you're someone who really started with, of course you had this kind of adoption with PBS very early on. What is the experience like now with a film that Netflix is handling the distribution of? What kind of control do you basically surrender? How does the process of you controlling the film and how it gets seen and shown and where?
It's like interesting and not interesting. Like there's a lot of getting down to brass tacks. Netflix actually, in fact, does not control the distribution.
Okay.
They've acquired the film, and they're a fantastic place to be. But it is sort of a different landscape. They're acquiring worldwide rights Whereas back in the day, if I had a film, I still retained a lot of those rights. And like HBO would only acquire a film for 18 months for North American broadcast only.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I would have the freedom to do whatever I wanted to do internationally.
Right.
So the good and the bad with Netflix is like, wow, this is amazing. Our film is going to go
everywhere
around the world.
Right.
Isn't it great? But from a business standpoint, their license is twice as long and 10,000 times as big, and the money ain't any bigger.
Right.
So that is, you know, not complaining, smallest violin, but it is from a business standpoint, the irony of all of the democratization of media and the internet and digital distribution is that it's actually a raw deal from a business standpoint for the filmmakers.
Kind of reaps smaller benefits in the end.
In this sense, it does. Yeah. So I think we're all still trying to figure out how to navigate that, and that's not the same. Each project is different. Each deal is different. But this sort of worldwide global distribution has its pros and cons.
If you were starting today, how would you do things differently?
I think if I was starting today, I would try to combine my kind of youthful naivete, the free champagne rugby playing girl, with a little more strategic planning. You know, I have done some teaching. I've taught at the Stanford graduate documentary program. Once in a while, I get to teach younger people. But I do think it's really important, not necessarily to be focused on ambition. I think empty ambition is quite depressing. But I think it's really important to have a sense of purpose and goals as to why you're doing what you do.
And to be vocal about it?
Sure, to yourself, if nothing else, right? And I think it took me a while to come to that place where I asked myself that question, why am I doing this? And that sounds, it's almost embarrassing to admit that, but it's almost because I had such a strong personal drive to do it, and it was so organic for me from a young age to shoot with a camera and be immersed with people that I never had to question why I was doing it. And because I hate to say it, I kind of lucked out that I sold my first film. I didn't have to be strategic. And so that was sort of a rude awakening when I got slightly older and was in my sort of sophomore effort, struggling more with the marketplace and the professional side of it. Wow, this is hard. This is really fucking hard. Like that, now I'm really gonna swear. But it's much easier to face those harder moments if you know what your purpose and your goal is. So I think I kind of, in a way, went about it backwards, and I wouldn't change that. You know, I don't regret. But yeah, if I could start again, I would like to sort of retain some of that youthful enthusiasm and mix it with a little more strategic planning.
Well, Amanda, it's been super exciting and awesome to have you here.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for taking the time. And of course, everyone can find Vegas Baby on iTunes and Netflix today. And can't wait to see the next thing that you're working on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And don't forget to tune in to Make It every week, where we talk to amazing creatives, telling their incredible stories, the amazing highs, and the sometimes dark, murky lows. It happens to all of us. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Jason Levine, and we will see you again next time.